literally a giant has departed, and I mean it not only in a physical way but also in a spiritual way. And this is the life of Jim Shooter, a giant. Not only physically, he was 6'7", but also a man of so much drive, and a man that has left a legacy, wanted and unwanted, accepted and dismissed by many too, but at the end of the day, a true giant that has shaped the industry. And still up to this day, we still see the benefits of what he did, whether you see it from the perspective that he did good, or you see it on the perspective that he did things that perhaps were not as good. But in the end, he left a mark that I don't think many can say the same or can even come close to what he did in the time that he was allotted to be in the industry, which was a lengthy career, but most importantly on the 9 years that he was editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics, which was an important time for the industry, for Marvel, of course, but definitely for the whole industry. And in many ways, we can say that Jim Shooter saved the industry from itself. And we nowadays, I think we are reaping the benefits of the things he did, whether people accept it or not, during that period of time. So in this video, as I've done several times, it seems, in this channel, I want to pay homage to his memory, his legacy, and really kind of touch base on the things that he did that, in my opinion, were so important, so crucial for the industry, and definitely something that I don't think many people will ever get close to. Maybe understand who Jim Shooter was, but definitely understand, at least we can accept that what he did in so many levels have changed the course of the comic book industry, but definitely has affected the way we see the world and the way we see this amazing hobby that we all share, comic collecting, reading comics, all the stories and all of the things that he set the foundation for, and all the people that he allowed to do the work really have affected us, and it continued to do through a lot of different medias beyond just comics, also through movies, through video games, through everything you can think of. Now, to understand Jim Shooter, the first thing we need to know is where he comes from. And he is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He comes from a blue-collar family. He's Polish descent. And as a person who has been around Polish people in many areas of my life, I got friends who are Polish descent. The Polish people are straight shooters. They don't mince words. And Jim Shooter definitely honored that name. He was a straight shooter, as far as I know, based on the accounts of many people who knew him. The last few days I've been reading a lot of his persona, about his character, all his colleagues, so the people who work with him, for him, they are been sharing in social media his memories, and they will tell you the same thing. No matter what, he was a complicated man. It was complicated as a person, but he was a straight shooter. He, again, didn't mince words, but he always find a way to express his ideas and really, in some way, impose what he believed in. And there's nothing wrong with that. I personally I like people who are like that. I don't like people who sugarcoat things. I don't like people who go, beat around the bush, go around things, and they don't tell you straight up what they think or how they feel. And it seems that Jim Shooter was the type of person that was like that. And believe me, in my life experience and on this earth, the years that I have, even on my jobs that I have over the years, people who I've worked for, the people who I treasure the most are the ones who actually went straight up and told me the things that I was doing wrong and the things that I could improve. And those are the people that I always appreciate the most, because they impacted me the most. The people who taught me the most, that pushed me the most to get out of the comfort zone and to really do my best, to give my best. And reading through the comments last night, I was reading a lot of different posts on social media, people who would share that they apply for a job at Marvel just to be denied, and many times he just simply said, well, this is not professional enough, things like that. And people feel like, a lot of people feel like heartbroken by it, in some big names too, saying that, but that led them to improve, at some point be able to have the door open at Marvel. Some people didn't. Some people, they just simply continued with life. And there was even a gentleman saying that he was denied, but he continued the career that ultimately he retired from, which was he became a teacher. And he was thankful for that denial. And to be honest, when you read stories like this, it really pinpoints the reality of human life. Who Jim Shooter was. He was a human being. And as a human being, he was flawed. He got good things. He got bad things. You know, he did a lot of great things. Some things are definitely sketchy. Some things definitely were bad. But ultimately, he was a man of conviction. And I think it's important to have this, particularly in this day and age, in this time and age where there are a lot of times I feel that people don't have the conviction. They don't hold on to those values. It seems that nowadays values are all over the place. You know, people, they say one thing, but they do the opposite. We see that in politics. We see that in everything. So people are not honest and are not forthcoming, and they're not straight shooters. But Jim Shooter was different than that. That was a different generation, I guess. And of course, that really, his personality was perhaps, you know, so people were pointing this, and I think, you know, I think it's important, you know, he may not have the best social skills, and that's something that perhaps he lacked. You know, of course, when you look at his history, again, he grew up in a blue collar family. There were people who were hard workers. You know, they didn't make enough. That's one of the reasons why he ended up in comics. Of course, he started reading comics as the story tells, as he has mentioned it. He was 12 years old, ended in the hospital. He had to go through a minor surgery. And when that happens, he started reading comics. During that time, that was 1962, I guess. And of course, it was Marvel Comics was brand new, so he started reading comics, and he was impacted by how Marvel Comics, the difference between Marvel and DC. Marvel being more with the times, you know, talking about about issues, by things that were more serious. He saw the flaw in a lot of these characters, and that really made him start writing for DC stories. And he started writing for the Legion of Superheroes, and his own story started sending this to DC for them for approval until he got called. He was only 13 years old when he got his first assignment. Can you imagine that? He was a genius, in my opinion, because when I remember being 13, I was not writing comics. I was reading comics, but I was not writing comics. He was 13 years old, so he was accepted for his first job. So he started working technically for DC at 14. He started writing things for Superman and Supergirl. Imagine the big assignment for this boy. And he continued doing some writing, of course, because the situation, as he mentioned many times, he did it for the money. He wanted to support his parents because they were struggling. You know, they were struggling. Ultimately, he had to leave that. He had to go back to work or got to go to school. You know, he was going through all of this. He went to try to go to college. Things didn't work out so good there too. And he started doing all kind of jobs, you know, in between, until he was offered again the job, a position to go back to comics, you know, and that's where he went to DC Comics, because they were given the opportunity to start writing for Legion of Superheroes again and doing stuff for Superman. So he was writing there in the 70s. And in the 70s, of course, like, he was offered by Mark Wolfman to go to work as an editor for Marvel Comics. And he was there. Marvel Comics, during that time, he was like a revolving door with, editors in chief, until he was given the green light. He was given the position because everybody else, I think, everybody else pretty much had quitted the job for a long time. You know, they couldn't last long. And I think Archie Goodwin was the one prior to him, and he took the job, and this was in 1978. And he had a stint as, editor-in-chief at Marvel for 9 years until 1987. I'm telling you, you may think it was a short period of time. When you think of 9 years, you know, many things happen in the comics during many generations, of course. You know, we're talking about the comics being here for 80, 90 years now. Different eras, of course, Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, the Dark Ages, whatever, the modern times. But during that period of time, in my opinion, of course, some of the most impactful, if you can think, of course, of the Bronze Age, the initial stories created by, the Stan Lee, by Jack Kirby, those were impactful for the foundation of the comic industry. But in the late 70s, I was born in the late 70s. Actually, I was born that year, in 1978. And in the 80s, it was a very crucial time for comics for survival. The medium was changing drastically. People were in some ways still, there was the need for people to stay in comics. And there were a lot of things happening during that particular time. And when he arrived, you know, there was a lot of, the industry was all over the place. You know, comics were all over the place. Marvel, you know, the Marvel house style of comics, which is technically giving a lot of power to the artists to create and to bring, which is great. You know, that created so many fantastic stories, and the Marvel place was a fun place to work in comparison to DC Comics, which was a bit more on the old-fashioned way, editorial type of style, where things are working a different schedule. You know, Marvel was more free spirit. It was the free will child, the one free spirited child that's doing whatever. But during that period of time, it was necessary for Marvel to get a hold of things. Of course, Marvel was expanding, it was growing, the industry was all over the place. There was a desire to go into the movie industry. Stan Lee moving to Los Angeles to trying to pursue that, trying to sell the product. You know, of course, that led to many things that happened in years later in the 90s. But the reality is that they were pursuing that, trying to start just establishing themselves this big franchises into toy industry. All of those things that were important, they trying to sell that product. So it was important for somebody to step in and take the pretty much the control, take the wheel, because it was during that era that many things set the foundation for Marvel Comics, at least for the enterprise that we know now. When you think about this time and era, not only he came and took over, but some of the best runs in comics happened during that period of time. You know, that is undeniable. Some of the best runs happened during that period of time. And I was going this morning trying to remember all of them. Of course, I can remember a few, many of them actually. But I wanted to wrap up the ones that were more impactful. And, you know, when you're thinking about the Uncanny X-Men and the New Mutants by Chris Claremont. So impactful. That era, that run, of course, John Byrne was, you know, drawing during that time. He was the star during that part of, you know, the late 70s and the early 80s. That is one of the most impactful runs that has changed, affected so much. And a lot of his footprint is there because, of course, he was the one actually they wanted to, in the end, Phoenix to die, you know, Jean Grey. He is the one that actually pushed for that. So many things that he did push. And of course, that created some controversy because some people felt that he was always imposing his own ideas on writers. He understood what people wanted. They wanted controversy. They wanted some elements to stay there, to linger in time. You know, to create a soap opera style of comic book stories. That he was good at that. I'm telling you. Sometimes people kind of bypass him, you know, for the things that they were more, you know, the bigger in his life, which as an editor, but they bypass. He was also a great writer. He understood the audience. Of course, he was a fan first and foremost, and he understood the characters and what people wanted to read. So he created those stories, and he got that in mind, and he imposed that in some way, but also pushed for writers to, even for rewrites, which of course people didn't like, but also to really emphasize some aspects that weren't so important and maintain a status quo. That was Jim Shooter. Of course, you're looking at the Fantastic Four, Alpha Flight by John Byrne, which in my opinion are the best, and I'm looking forward for the film, the Fantastic Four film. You know, but the footprint was there. Of course, he allowed that to happen. You look talking about Iron Man by David Michelinie, which has created so much impact in the Iron Man that we know now, more than the ones prior to it. They're run by David Michelinie, Bob Layton, John Romita Jr. Iconic. You're talking about the Mighty Thor by Walter Simonson, which in my opinion is the best Thor. Because you can think about Jack Kirby, but in my opinion, Walter Simonson was my Thor, has always been my Thor. Because how impactful, how likable, how I felt that the character connected with me, you know, reading the comic books. You're talking about Daredevil and Wolverine too, the original first like mini series of Wolverine by Frank Miller. But Daredevil, impactful. You know, we couldn't think about all those things. He allowed these things to happen. You're talking about Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man. You're talking about Spectacular Spider-Man. You're talking about the Avengers, the West Coast Avengers. That was an impactful time. Of course, some things kind of like people are going to blame him for the things that happened. The treatment of Carol Danvers, for example, during that initial run when, you know, of course, she was raped, all that stuff, that he actually allowed it to happen. And he actually was the one with the idea to happen. Of course, those things we can say that in some way, you know, Jim Shooter was old-fashioned in some ways, and sometimes people were not happy with the way he approached certain things that they, of course, nowadays we couldn't just see in comics. you know, we were not be able to see those stories in comics, the way women were treated during that time. Captain America by Mark Grunwald, which impactful for so many people. That is their Captain America, a very impactful run. And not only you can think about a lot of the things that happened during his tenure, his 9-year tenure. You're talking about What If, for example, started in 1977, but he pushed for What If, you know, continue on through the different runs, lasted for a while. He was an editor-in-chief during that time. Contest of Champions, that was his idea. Secret Wars, Contest of Champions, Secrets of Wars, a lot of people find them not necessarily the best stories, but when you think about Secret Wars, what it laid the foundation for the toy industry, for Toy Biz and all that stuff, for the toy lines, we wouldn't have today. And that's something that we can be thankful, like Marvel Legends, none of these toy lines if it wasn't for Secret Wars. Secret Wars really started things. Of course, you can say Super Friends on DC, and Marvel wanted to hit the same way, but you know, Marvel Legends today, they owe so much to the Secret Wars toy line. Also, Marvel got involved with so many different cartoons and toy lines. They did the movies too, like the Star Wars movie started in the comics 1977, but during his tenure, you know, there was a lot of different things that offshoots, the droids, for example, the Ewoks, but the whole run as well. You see, for example, Transformers, the comics during that era, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, ROM, Micronauts. All of these things happened during his tenure. And he was a big supporter of that and trying to sell products to children, which was impactful, and it was a great idea that really maintained the comic book industry. Also, another thing that he's known for, he was the one who pushed for the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, because of course he created a method, or he wanted people to stay within the Marvel method, but also to maintain continuity with the characters. Something that was needed for Marvel, something that was important. And of course, a lot of people dislike because it felt that they were controlled and in some way manipulated to follow his vision, another vision. But at the same time, it's important to maintain a standard, just to maintain the status quo, or at least to maintain what people are perceiving of these characters. The reality is that you want characters to have that continuity, so you can continue going back and reading these comics, and you can jump from one place to another comic book, and you can see the same character behaving, acting under the same events that happened before. It's so terrible when you go from one comic and you see this version of Captain America, and you go to another comic and you see a totally different version. Of course, things like this can change, but you know, that doesn't mean that he had no ideas. He had an idea also to create what later was used for what will become, of course, the Ultimate Universe. It was his idea, but when the time that he presented this idea, people didn't accept it as much, but that was his desire. Yeah, he was a complicated man. I never got the opportunity to meet him. All I can do is to live on the eyes of those, or the experiences of those who have the blessing to work alongside him and to share those stories. Of course, there are trolls as well. Some people have come, like Jim Starlin, have come to his defense. And to me, it's so good when there are people who will defend you, who will accept that you have issues. You know, everybody has issues. I do, everyone does. But someone that in the end did so much for the industry and set a foundation, because he tied the belt for Marvel. He made things work out the way they needed to do. And during that time, Marvel grew in a way that was not seen before. The comics were on time. He pushed for so many things, of course, the epic imprint, things like that. He was a very big supporter of giving back to the artists. Of course, you know, he demanded a lot from them, but at the same time, he gave back. And that's important. You know, it's good to have a boss that demands a lot from you, but also is willing to give to you what you deserve and what you earn. And some people may agree or disagree on that, but he set the foundation for later in the years. You know, when the Image Comics guy, you know, they actually were thriving. They were ripping the benefits of the things that he set the foundation, because prior to Jim Shooter, there was a lot of struggle at Marvel. Artists that were not getting, freelancers were not getting the same benefits. They did not have insurance. They did not have the same benefits or the same royalties. He set a foundation of royalties. He created so many things that in the end alienated him too with his people above him, the people investors, because they wanted to make money. Of course, unfortunately, within that society, people want to make money and take advantage of others. That is capitalist way 101. But he, at the end of the day, and that perhaps is the reason why he didn't last more than 9 years, because he was a middleman. He was the one that ultimately became the punching bag for the artist, but also the punching bag from the people above, his employers, because they wanted more money and to pay less, and they wanted to be recognized, but also give him a voice. And he's the one that has to kind of meet in between and have to kind of bring and gap all these things together. And he did a heck of a job. Of course, you know, after what happened with Marvel, he went and created, of course, his own universe, which in my opinion is still a fantastic universe that deserves attention, and we don't get it as much. Unfortunately, with Valiant Comics, that of course then things didn't work out with Valiant. You know, Acclaim came, and there was other different companies that escape my mind right now where he did that. They never really work at the same level. You know, he was one of the ones that was, you know, he got investors to buy Marvel Comics, but another investor took over the play, you know, and unfortunately his bid was the second largest bid. If not, he will be actually the owner of Marvel Comics now. There's so much that we can say, and there's so much we can remember, but I'm gonna choose to remember him for the good things. A lot of my favorite artists have beef with him. Some people that I admire the most, but also some of the people I admire the most were not the easiest to deal with. And if you have followed this industry close, as I have since as a kid, I've been reading comics. I've been following the comic industry. I'm a big fan of comics. I read the stories, the biographies. I love to read all that history. I'll tell you, you know, people are, again, flawed. They're not perfect. They're human beings. There's a lot of egos in the industry, but it's part of the artistic personality. I think people who this personalities, of course, are those who are artists, those who have that much talent, are passionate about what they do. They always will be complicated people, and that's what makes them special and different at the same time, and hard to deal with. And Jim Shooter, you know, he was a company man, but also he was a man of great talent and a visionary, a man that perhaps will be remembered not for the greatest things he did by some, but definitely he will be remembered by others as on the impact that he left behind and what he really did for the industry. It's sad when I come to this place where I'm 46 years old, turning 47, and I think about all the heroes. You know, it seems like more and more I do these videos where I have to say goodbye to good people, and less I feel like, wow, you know, like as surprised as I was maybe like 5-6 years ago when I started noticing this trend. We're not meant to live forever. But I think it's important that whatever we do in life, we do it with passion, and that whatever we do it with the best of our intentions. Sometimes people will not understand our intention, and that's okay. I think a lot of people misunderstood Jim Shooter, and a lot of people judge him harshly because of the things that he did in order to do something better or to create a product that actually was worth keeping. Many different companies have come and gone. Marvel Comics have been one of many, but it stayed in the most important time where there was a change, a shift in the industry, where things were changing into and so many things in different mediums. It was a time where people were shifting into their televisions. People were going into the animation. Kids were more interested in animation than were in comics. It's also the surge of the direct market, and he was a supporter of a direct market with Dazzler, for example, that went there, and you know, things like that. He was in so many ways laid foundations that some people will judge and say, well, that was the demise of the comic industry, but I wouldn't say so. I don't think the direct market was a demise of the industry. It was a survival thing that needed to occur for the industry to have the tools to be able to survive to this day. Now we're able to see the benefits. Of course, Marvel now under Disney, we can see the movies, all of that, the video games, all of that. It's a byproduct of that, of the survival instincts that Jim had and he pushed for. And I think the foundation that he left will leave these franchises for years to come. Whether the comics survive or not, at least the characters survive. And he did protect them the right way. Whether we agree with his method or not, his ideas or the way he did it, that is a totally different dialogue. But the reality is that what he did protected this franchise, Marvel franchise, in a way that needed to be protected, and brought so many great stories, so many great characters were created under his tutelage, under his protection. You know, and those characters, those stories are still impacting comics, are still impacting the industry as a whole. And every time I see a movie, a Marvel movie, for example, and I see some story that happened or something that is an offshoot of a story that happened under his tenure as an editor-in-chief, then it brings a big smile to my face, because I know that it was not just the writer, but also the people behind the writer, the artists, the editors, everyone else that really chipped in to create the story that was brought to us and impacted our childhood. And now be it seeing it presented in the big screen, at least in some form of, in shape or form, I feel that was a good job. That was a job well done by Shooter and his team and by his people. So I would say Godspeed to Jim Shooter. I hope I can meet you one day. And that is my hope, that I can say thank you in person in the afterlife, and thank you for what you did, and in many ways for being a good steward of what was given to you and the responsibility that was bestowed upon you. And I appreciate it. As a fan, I always gonna appreciate it, and I thank you for what you have done. My condolences go to his family and friends, and to the fans as a whole, and to the comic book industry. Because it's sad, it seems that nowadays, again, we seem to say this more and more, and to say goodbye to good people. And I hope the best for him, now in the afterlife. But for everyone else in this industry, for his friends, for his family, for all of us, that long live comic books, long live Marvel Comics. And thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. If you have an experience to share, if anything that Jim Shooter did impacted you in a way, or any story that you can share with me in the comments, I will truly appreciate it. I love to read those stories. I've been enjoying reading a lot of the stories. Some of them are they're straight to the point, Some of them are funny, but definitely they showcase a man like any of us, imperfect in all his ways, but at the end of the day, a man of straight conviction, a man that we can all relate with. So my friends, God bless, take care. I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.